Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to another episode of the Ummah podcast show, where we help decolonize your mind. We're your hosts, Zishan and Ali, and this is our continuing podcast series on the topic of Caliphate in Islam. And today we're lucky enough to have Brother Daniel Haqiqatjou to join us to talk about this very important topic. Brother Daniel writes and lectures on contemporary issues surrounding Muslims and modernity, and these can be found at his personal project site at Muslim Skeptic. He's also spoken at universities and mosques around the world, and his work has been featured in outlets such as the Washington Post, The Atlantic, CNN, and Al Jazeera. We'd like to welcome you, Brother Daniel, to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate being on the show.
Yeah, so this is actually a continuing series we've started on the concept of Caliphate in Islam, because this is one of the pressing stories out there actually among Muslims. And this is a hot topic these days. So I want to actually start off by asking you, for the benefit of the listeners, what exactly is Caliphate? Because actually for Muslims who are listening as well, some Muslims are not familiar with the term Caliphate, and some who are, they base it on what the media has projected about it. So, what exactly is Caliphate in Islam, and is it an important aspect of Islam?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very important aspect of Islam. Khilafah, Imama, also as it's called. And it just means, the overall authority of a leader and his advisors and his, government, authority over the Muslims. And it's something that unites all Muslims. And what the Khalifa is responsible for is not only uniting the Muslims, but also, defending Islam, defending the territory of Muslims, Dar al-Islam, looking, after the interests of the Ummah, of the Muslim community, and all of the different things that come under Islamic leadership, Islamic governance, being able to enforce judgments from judges who are applying Islamic law, applying the Sharia. So all of these things and more come under the concept of the Khilafah, and is very important in Islam.
So, I know that it's been, out of any discussion on Islam with non-Muslims or non-Muslims, this topic is never even mentioned, right? And now, being that people have been more aware of what's happening to the Muslims all around the world, such as the persecutions, and we're literally being killed around the world. I think there's been an interest in this aspect, as well as without a deputy, these things are going to continue taking place. And as you have been a critic of liberalism and secularism, which basically has kind of taken over, or basically that's a very system that almost the entire world is subject to. I think Muslims are kind of waking up and say there has to be an alternative, and this is the alternative. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, you can call it an alternative. I don't think that it's liberalism and secularism that in and of themselves as concepts are responsible for subjugating Muslims. That's definitely, it's a tool. Liberalism and secularism as a political, economic, and moral tool is used to subjugate the Muslims, but throughout the world. But who is doing the subjugating, right? And when we look at who is doing the subjugating, it is Western powers who are doing that. And currently the superpower is the United States. You have Israel. You have different Western European states who are complicit in that through the arm of the UN And so they are the ones in power, and their power consists of having weapons, having nuclear armaments, having weapons of mass destruction, and that's what it really boils down to, is having that kind of power that's really unmatched. And so when you have that power, then you can enforce whatever system that you want on the rest of the world. And so they're imposing a system, this liberal secular system, representational democracy, on Muslims through different proxy states and propped up dictators throughout, the Arab world and the Muslim world more largely, and then states where there isn't necessarily a Western agent, a Western dictator, Western-backed dictator. There's economic sanctions, and there are all kinds of economic terrorism, essentially, to coerce Muslims around the world to adopt the liberal secular mandate and to serve the interests of Western powers, as opposed to serving people serving their own interests, their sovereign, which is something that's so important to sovereignty and for people to be sovereign, is that they are able to pursue their own interests instead of prioritizing the interests of a foreign power. But that really can't happen. That really can't exist in the world because we have a superpower that has its grip on the necks of the entire world. And so you can have a country. I mean, this is the reality, and I'm not trying to be overly a downer about it, but you can have a country that adopts, concept of Khilafah, and they start implementing the Sharia and so on and so forth. But as long as there is a superpower that can say that, look, you're going against what we want, our economic interests, our political interests, we're going to sanction you. Maybe we're going to intervene, quote unquote. Maybe we're going to have a UN resolution to even invade and occupy to make sure that you are implementing human rights instead of this theocracy that oppresses women and religious minorities and homosexuals. So this is the methodology that's been used over the past 80 years, ever since the end of World War II. The human rights regime has been the tool that's been used to project Western power and Western interests across the entirety of the globe. And so when we talk about Khilafah and the possibility of Khilafah, we have to recognize that we can talk about it, we can, work towards it by encouraging Muslims to think that, yes, this is the ideal. Yes, this is something that is important in Islam. But at the end of the day, our hands are tied because we're in this kind of hostage scenario. And, it's Allah who will change and can change our condition and the condition of the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Ali.
No, I mean that's I think that's a fair assessment. Just to kind of add on to it as well. So seems like we are pretty much facing a blockade in terms of let's say for example country A wants to implement Sharia or adopt the political system of Khilafah, and we're gonna have an onslaught from pretty much everybody in the world including UN. So I mean, just to kind of put it into a theological perspective, are we to, rely on Allah and Allah's promise in terms of, sacrifices which would be needed for the implementation of Sharia? Or are we to be pragmatic in terms of, doing cost-benefit analysis? What's your take on that?
What do you mean being pragmatic or a cost-benefit analysis?
So pragmatic meaning, if you're trying to implement Sharia, I'm going to have a blockade by UN, all the economic ties will be cut off. it'll be impossible for country A to carry on its implementation of Sharia because you're going to be cut off from the world essentially. You might get into wars, for example, and all sorts of things. Whereas if Allah's telling you have to live in Sharia and I should be the only one who should be scared off, then in terms of that, I mean, where do we stand? Like, do we really still keep moving forward regardless of the consequences that we have to face? UN's onslaught as an example, or we look at it, okay, this is not the right time. We need to have a vacuum where we can come in and then transition the Sharia back into to its proper place.
No, we need to strive. We need to strive for that, and the way that it happens is if these countries, if the Muslim countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Turkey, Qatar, some of these Northern African countries, the Middle East in general, if these countries were to unite on the importance of Islamic governance, yeah, that would be great, and that would really, through that kind of unity, that would pose a challenge to the Western imperial hegemony. Yeah, that would be great. That would be something that we would hope for. But what does that come down to? It comes down to people, Muslims throughout the world, recognizing this as the ideal, recognizing this as something that they would want to pursue. The problem is that, as you mentioned in the introduction to the podcast, there's too many colonized minds, unfortunately, and you have Muslims who have bought into this idea and they've drunk the Kool-Aid, so to speak, of, well, the superior system is secularism. The superior system is having a secular democracy, and you have different groups voting and so on and so forth. Like, this is the idea that many Muslims or the paradigm that many Muslims around the world are operating under. And so if you have that kind of if that idea hasn't been thoroughly deconstructed and crushed, then you can have people and even governments who are appealing to this idea and saying that, look, we're just trying to be civilized, secular, or civilized democratic countries. And so any idea of a khilafah, that's just theocracy, and we all know theocracy is evil. So these kinds of ideas have to be deconstructed. The alternative has to be taught and championed. And so that's an educational project that is required for the Muslim community throughout the world. And that's what I really dedicate myself to in my writing. What I try to emphasize is that Islam, Allah has sent guidance for every level of human existence, on the individual, personal level, meaning, things like prayer, things like personal obligations, things like being concerned about the state of your heart and your niyyah, ikhlas, and so on and so forth. Then there's the marital level. Allah has sent guidelines on how to conduct ourselves in marriage, the roles and responsibilities of husband and wife, so on and so forth. And then Allah has sent guidance for the family level, the family sphere. How are fathers and children supposed to interact with each other, mothers and children, brothers and sisters, and so on and so forth. The extended family structure, what are the rights and responsibilities. And then there's the communal level, okay, with the imam, with the establishment of masajid, with the establishment of awqaf, for example, waqf, communal funds, maybe collection of zakat. And that's where it gets to the level of governance. Okay, Allah has also sent guidance for how to govern and how society should be structured, and how criminal prosecution, criminal punishment, financial transactions, all of those larger governmental functions. Also, there is guidance. So So on every level of human existence, Allah has sent guidance, and that's what Islam is. It's a comprehensive system and way of life. And so if you take out one of these parts, okay, then you've abridged Islam. You've abridged Islam, and that's the kind of Islam that the entire world, unfortunately, is forced into practicing because there is, like I said, this hegemonic force that is preventing governance, Islamic governance, and khilafah and so forth, which is a part of Islam.
Yeah.
So if we don't recognize the guidance and we don't recognize the superiority that Islam provides, this comprehensive system touching on every aspect of human existence, every sphere of human existence, then how are we going to really aspire to that system? So that's really the difficulty, and I think the first step, I think the first step is that we recognize this reality, and we have that confidence, and we have that sense of pride, and that this is what our deen is. This is what Allah has sent. It's superior to these other kinds of models that are just based on the musings of, random European 17th, 18th century philosophers in one part of the world. Like, we have to recognize that the deen of Allah is light, and all of these other systems are darkness that is currently enshrouding the world.
Yeah. So this is very interesting because in our previous podcast show we were talking about how basically because, as you said, we need to decolonize ourselves, right? Because we've drink from the same Kool-Aid as the secularists and the liberals do, and the way to achieve and understand that Islam is a comprehensive system and includes everything, even the government sphere, is to try to change the ideology of the people and the ideology of those who are in power, and that's the only way society can shift towards that ideal we're talking about. And what I find interesting is, like, up until now, like whenever we give nasiya or dawah to both Muslims and non-Muslims, we don't show that it's Islam. It's like we show that it's like, personally it's a solution for you, but we don't always project it as it has solutions for all the problems of the world, right? And on a governmental level, right? So I guess my it leads into this question, like, for dawah carriers, like in the West, like, should the talk of caliphate like be in the forefront, when giving dawah and nasiya to both Muslims and non-Muslims? And if you can kind of share your what do you think on that? Why or why not?
Well, I mean, the forefront, I'm not sure what you mean by that, but the conveying Islam, you convey Islam in its entirety. You don't convey part of the book and conceal part of the book, right?
Exactly.
This is what we find from other communities that preceded us, Ahlul Kitab and so forth. So we present Islam completely. And what I have found effective in communicating to non-Muslims is that, if you believe in God or not, okay, so some of them do, some of them don't. But those who do, Christians and so forth, they believe in God. Okay, so do you think God, a merciful, loving God, would put us on this earth and not give us guidance on how to live and how to conduct ourselves and how to flourish as human beings? Do you think God has just left us without guidance? And of course, they'll say, no, I think that God would provide guidance. Okay, then if you agree to that, then don't you think that God would provide guidance for every dimension and aspect of life, from the personal to the familial to the communal, and even at the governmental or economic level? And so that's a compelling idea. That's a compelling logical idea. Yeah, of course. Like, what does guidance mean? Why do we have to compartmentalize Allah's guidance and say, no, religion is only concerned with, your personal state, the state of your heart, and doesn't extend to things like governance or economics. This is the secular modeling or the secular construction of what religion is. That no, religion is about what you have in the privacy of your own home, and then leave to Caesar what is Caesar's. Allow Caesar, the secular government to rule as he will rule according to his whims, according to his desires and his system of thought. So why should we accept that? Like, how does that even make sense? And even today, like within secular states, even with what you do in the privacy of your own home, quote unquote, is not guaranteed by the secular state. In the past, there used to be some conception of families and parents have a right to decide how they raise their children. But this is not really the case in the secular world anymore. The state is authorized to enforce the way that you can raise your children and the choices that you make for your children. So even on that level, religion is not even applicable. It's literally at this point, and even that, there's slowly an encroachment on religion is just concerned with what you have in your heart and what you practice in the confines of your home by yourself, not even extending to your children. So this is an encroachment of secularism. So when we talk to non-Muslims, going back to the original question, when we talk to non-Muslims, we emphasize the completeness of Islam, and that includes concepts like the Khilafah, as well as many other things like, okay, well, look at society, look at the amount of sexual deviance and degradation. Look at the degeneracy that we see around us. Look at how the West is sliding into all of these disgusting kinds of practices. Who is going to come and enforce morality and sexual propriety? This is something that is a part of the Sharia. This is something that's very important because it is within all of our interests as human beings, and especially as human beings within a community context, to preserve sexual decency and sexual morality. And so there's an interest here that is not served by the secular state, as we are seeing in the West. We are seeing the damage it's causing. We are seeing that almost half of children being born are born in single family households where they don't have both of their parents. This is a cost to human beings. This is, if you want to talk about human rights violation, this is human rights violation. This is the essence of violating a person's right when they don't even have both mother and father in their lives. They don't, in many cases, don't even know who their fathers are, and even secular economists and sociologists will note all of the harms that come from the single parent household, the increase in drug use, crime, so on and so forth. So this is something that is, how can the secular system address this? Well, this is inbuilt into the Sharia. This is inbuilt into hudud and the penal code, consequences for illicit sexual behavior. Okay, this is part and parcel of Islam. That Islam is the truth. This is Allah's guidance. This is your Creator's guidance on preserving society. And your own Christian and secular historians and thinkers note how the rise and fall of civilizations is intricately tied to sexual morality. And when a civilization starts experiencing decadence and degeneracy, then that causes moral decline. The moral character of a nation crumbles, and then the nation crumbles soon after that. So there's this interest that is not addressed by your secular vision of society, but is at the heart, or is part and parcel of the Islamic model.
Yeah, I mean that's quite telling because one of the first things that the colonialists did to basically destroy the Caliphate system was to enforce basically getting rid of public modesty, right? I mean that was their one of the first things they did, right? And also also we have it has to be shown, well, for both Muslims and non-Muslims, that Islam carries solutions to all the multifarious problems, right, including the economic problem that the world is in, right, where a few rich people control, more than half of the poor's people's wealth here in this world. So it has a solution for almost every sphere. So we're going to get to the theoretical part of this podcast now, because I know there have been certain movements who've tried for 50, 60 years to bring back the Caliphate for the Muslims, and it seems it hasn't worked. Like it hasn't really gone anywhere, because, as you said, the Muslims in the so-called in the Muslim lands are actually, let's see, sometimes it seems that they're drinking more of the secular Kool-Aid than the secularists themselves. Like, if you see what's happening there, if you look at
more Catholic than the Pope.
So, for example, like if you look at the TV serials and the cinema there, what would be considered a family movie, actually a family movie in the West would be considered more family appropriate than a family movie that's happening in countries like Pakistan or etc. So maybe we've been thinking about that, and this is the discussions we've been having on this series of Caliphate, is maybe our strategy should change in the way that we're trying to work towards bringing the Islam back in society, which we see as a comprehensive solution for humanity. Perhaps, like I even thought of maybe, rather Islam rising from the east, it might rise from the west, right? Because there's a lot of potential. Relatively, we do have freedoms to go out there and project Islam as a comprehensive system, but it looks like a lot of Muslims are not even taking advantage of that. Do you want to comment on that, Brother Daniel?
Well, yeah, I think that there is an opportunity for Muslims in the West to be speaking like this, and I think the reality is that at the end of the day, power is what is going to determine what kind of governance is allowed, what kind of system is allowed for Muslims, and so that's something that is always going to be limited, because even within, when it comes to speech and speaking, it's not as free as some might think. If you say certain things that are going to fundamentally pose a challenge to Western interests, they're going to crack down very hard. And there are many examples of this within the Muslim community, especially post 9/11, but even prior to that. So there are limitations. The thing is that, or what, I try to console myself with or recognize, is that when it comes to superpowers and when it comes to civilizations, there's rise and fall. And so just because the world situation and the Western hegemony is what it is today, that doesn't mean that that's going to be the case in 50 years or in a generation or two generations. So situations can change, and I think what our priority should be, this is just my personal opinion, and people can disagree, is that these kinds of larger forces, because the amount of organizing that we can do is going to ultimately be limited when there's a superpower with nuclear weapons, right? And we can advocate for Khilafah and so on and so forth, but the buck stops with the nuclear weapons. So, but what we have to be concerned with is we need to get the Muslim community's mindset right. Okay? We need to get the Muslim community's mindset on, okay, what are we aspiring to? What is Islam offering us? Are we truly cognizant of Islam and the superiority of Islam, to the extent that when, inshallah, the opportunity arises, and the opportunity will arise, are we going to make the right decisions? Are we going to be on the right side? Okay, and I'm saying will happen bi'ithnillah, because this is part of our eschatology. This is part of what the Prophet ﷺ has told us will happen before Yawm al-Qiyamah. So it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. We have to prepare ourselves for that. We have to prepare ourselves so that when it does happen, we recognize that it's happening, and we make the right decisions, and the decisions that need to be made when it happens. So that's my priority, and emphasizing Khilafah is a part of that, no doubt.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, I think I totally agree with you there as well. But my next question was basically, during the discourses, let it be deconstruction of liberalism, feminism, individualism, and their respective critique from an Islamic perspective. And also especially, for the Dawah carriers right now, who focus primarily on Islam being the personal, religious matter. Too much focus on the praise and, fasting and, a specific way to actually, hold your arms during the prayer, et cetera, et cetera.
Islam gives women rights and things like this.
Yeah, and it seems to be, that we tend to fail in looping it back to the ultimate solution, specifically for Muslim being the Khilafah. So ultimately we are ready, inshallah, when the time is right. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I do agree that...
Yeah, go on, sorry.
Well, yeah, I do agree that there is a de-emphasis on those aspects of Islam that do not match the secular liberal construction of Islam and religion in general. Mm-hmm. And so de-emphasizing things like the holistic nature of the Sharia, de-emphasizing things like hudud, de-emphasizing imama itself. So those, for sure, I mean, that's because the Muslim mind has been colonized, has been liberalized. And that's what's preventing many Muslims around the world from seeing, what Islam offers and the ultimate solution. I think that when you talk about ultimate solution, I don't think that can be reduced to just the Khilafah. I don't think that if, today, if for example, tomorrow, the structures of governance around the world, the geopolitical situation suddenly changes, and you don't have these superpowers, and then Muslims decide, okay, we're going to put the Khilafah in place. We have a Khalifa, we're all united under him. And then he's going to implement Islamic law. I don't think that that's going to, result in worldwide change for Muslims in terms of their relationship with Allah. And ultimately, that's what is critical and what is essential is Muslim individual relationship with Allah, because we're going to be judged individually on Yawm al-Qiyamah by Allah. So and why is that? Why do I think that? I think that, as I mentioned, like Islam is a complete in these different spheres. So if you have the one aspect of it, if you have on the governmental level, you have the Khilafah, but on the marital level or the familial level, people are still operating under a liberal secular paradigm, then that's still dysfunctional. You're still going to have many problems if you don't have if you don't have families, Muslim families that are operating according to Islam, but instead have taken on this kind of feminist, liberal understanding of family and the relationship between husband and wife, how there are no gender roles, how you can have, your wife, it's perfectly fine for her to just not prioritize children and then go work in a corporate environment. So that kind of familial level issues, which is vast, like I'm just giving you 2 sentences on it. Mm-hmm. But if that's not in place, or the communal level is not in place, then it's not going to work, right? Everything has to come together right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything has to come in a complete way. So we don't. So I wouldn't put it in the sense that the Khilafah is the ultimate solution. Islam is the ultimate solution in its entirety, in its holistic logic and complementarity of all of these different spheres of human life.
Okay. Yeah, I see your point. I mean, I think what you're trying to say is also that, efforts needs to be exerted, both at the grassroots levels and also, the top-down approach also needs to be worked on as well.
Even on the personal level, like I mentioned, like the family level, even on the personal, you have the Khilafah, okay? You have the Khilafah in that hypothetical scenario that I mentioned. The Khilafah comes into power and starts, let's say, banning riba, which is great, and starts enforcing some of the hudud, or all of the hudud. And then, but individuals are suffering from, let's say, hasad, or they're suffering from a lack of ikhlas, or the Muslims are, have fallen into shahwa, and they just are prioritizing shahwa, and they're controlled by their shahawat, or they're, all of these diseases of the heart on the individual level. Okay, so that's not going to be a good situation. Just because there's khilafah there, it doesn't solve those problems.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
I think I agree with your viewpoint. However, wouldn't you think, even if you were to look back at, Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's times, even during the Medina, we still had the, munafiqun, and, not everybody in the society was actually truly, following Islam in a comprehensive manner. We would always have, certain segments within the society which are, not going to be happy, or you're not going to be following the Islamic injunctions, the way they ought to be followed. How do you distinguish? How do you think, maybe a certain segment of the society needs to be, following the injunctions in its proper manner? Let's say, 50 or 60% of country A. Then it could be.
Don't get me wrong. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not one of these people that is saying that, we have to make sure that everyone in the world, or every Muslim is a wali, and only then we can think about the khilafah. Right. I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that all of these things are related, and we tend to have this overemphasis on governmental power, because that's the model that is currently in vogue in the world. You have a nation-state model, and the state dictates morality, and the state kind of imposes and controls all its subjects in a very overt way. But that's not something that has existed historically. It has not existed within pre-modernity, and it's not something that Muslims were familiar with, even though they were under the Khilafah. The problem, or what has allowed this situation today of one central governmental authority dictating pretty much every aspect of a human being's life, where even within your home, you have to worry about, making sure your grass is cut in a specific way. Otherwise, the homeowners association will give you a citation. If you don't pay the citation, they can put a lien on your house, and your home can be foreclosed. And then the sheriff comes in and kicks you out by force, takes you to prison because you haven't cut your grass the right way. So how is that possible? You have to have a massive bureaucratic technological system that can allow that degree of control. And so that's something that is foreign to most of humanity throughout history. It's just a very modern situation, and I think it's a mistake, or we can't just project that kind of paradigm onto Islam in the same way, because even if you look at the time of the Khulafa Rashidun, their power was limited in the sense that they couldn't enforce or make sure that every single Muslim, every single home was practicing and believing in the right way. And so that's something that didn't exist, but that doesn't mean that they didn't have authority or the imama. Yes, you had the Khalifa who was serving that kind of governmental role, but it's very different than what we see in with modern nation states.
Yeah, like I actually just wanted to add, like because you talked about a hypothetical scenario where there is a vacuum, a power vacuum, and a government comes up and says, okay, this is the Caliphate now, and you're talking about that certain scenario where the people are still operating operating on the previous paradigm of secularism and liberalism. But even in that hypothetical scenario, enjoining the right and forbidding the bad would still continue in any, be it caliphate or non-caliphate system, right? Be it that we're subject to an Islamic system or not, that is still that's still a fard, right? That's still a priority that in any system would continue. Right, enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. So, because the whole point of the Islamic system is to facilitate taqwa, right, in society, right. So, even for the nominal Muslim, the Caliphate system is better than a secular system, right, in any given day.
Yeah, no question, no question about it. No, I'm completely on the same page as what you're describing. I'm just saying that particular phraseology, perhaps.
Yeah, I understand. I understand that it's not the
solution.
Like I understand that. Yeah. It's there to it's there to facilitate the ultimate solution for everyone, basically, right? You could say it like that.
Because you can say that maybe the ultimate solution is birr al-walidain. Maybe that you could say that is the ultimate solution. Why? Because so much of our existence depends on our relationship with our parents. And maintaining good ties of kinship, and this is emphasized so much in the Quran and Sunnah, and so this is this determines the character of people, how they behave, through how they're raised, what's their tarbiyah, and so if we don't think very carefully about something as important as birr al-walidain, that's not something that a governmental power like the Khalifa is going to be able to dictate.
Yeah, they're not supposed to dictate, right?
If you think of that,
I said they're not supposed to dictate. I mean, for example, dictate in the sense that they're not supposed to dictate what happens in your private sphere, right? Right. So, because for example,
the Khalifa.
Yeah. Yes. They're not allowed to.
Well, it depends on what you mean by dictate. Like, for example, the government can, the Khalifa can create governmental programming that emphasizes birr al-walidain.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yes. Yeah.
Create different incentives or create even penalties for those who violate things like that. Yeah, there's plenty of ways that in a current nation state bureaucratic context, a government or a Khilafa-based government can encourage certain values.
Oh, definitely.
My point was that the way that I think about it is that you have a top-down versus bottom-up, right? The islah of a society, the rectification of the ummah. We can have a top-down or a bottom-up model. Top-down would be, okay, we have the Khalifa, and the Khalifa is going to institute all of these policies that are going to rectify the Muslim ummah. That's one model. The other model is to say that, okay, we have this emphasis on Islamic values on the personal level, the marital level, the family context. We make sure that we're applying the Quran and Sunnah, and then society will order itself because families are ordered, people are ordered, and that creates, the islah that we're seeking. I think that we can't emphasize one aspect at the expense of the other. I think, again, there's a holistic model that Allah gives us.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That we can see in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and we can see in the example of even some of the Anbiya in the Quran. such as Musa alayhi salam. So I'm just sensitive about overemphasizing one at the expense of the other. The liberal secularists, the modernists will emphasize the kind of bottom up, and they will completely ignore or belittle the notion of khilafah on that basis. I think that's wrong. And then I also want to be conscious of the other tendency that we don't start thinking that bottom down is the only way or is the ultimate way. I think there needs to be balance.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. Well, Jazakallah khair for sharing your thoughts on that, Brother Daniel. It looks like we have gone over time. Brother Ali, is there anything you want to add, or?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything. We definitely need to have a part 2 on this.
Well,
and thank you, Brother Daniel, for agreeing to be on the show on such a short notice. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, and
my pleasure. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, well, I'd like to thank everyone for listening, and assalamu alaikum.